Melbourne, 1942, and a woman applies the finishing touches to her look. She's heading out on the town. Amongst the men she might encounter, GIs arriving daily from America. And one of them is a serial killer with a bizarre fetish. He wants to steal the voices of women he meets.
Suddenly, reading the paper in the morning, there would be, alongside news of the latest developments in the war, news of the latest attack upon a woman.
Is it a New Jersey man who's been seen lurking in the shadows near tram and train terminals? Private Eddie Leonsky cuts a perplexing figure, often drunk and bizarrely talking in a high-pitched tone.
It was this voice, this softness that he wanted somehow to have, this thing that he kept emulating himself, soothing himself with these voices.
3 women are dead and detectives are sure there will be more victims, unless they can get inside the mind of a serial killer. In 3 May weeks, no woman was safe during the so-called Melbourne Brownouts of 1942.
It created a city of shadows, of frightening corners.
With the lights doused or dimmed to make life hard for Japanese bombers, 3 women had been snatched, stripped, strangled, left for dead. Melbourne was a city at war, but the danger was from a friend at home, not the enemy abroad. Already known for his heavy drinking and sexual abuse of a woman at home in New Jersey, Private Ed Leonsky arrived in Australia at a time when relations between the Allies were not always what the authorities wanted.
More troops for the American Expeditionary Force in Australia. Armed convoys winning the game of hide-and-seek with enemy fleets.
Rumours abounded about GIs running off with the wives of Australian diggers or soldiers. Complaints were common of the Yanks being overpaid, oversexed, and overhear.
To some, the American troops seemed exotic creatures. Hollywood looks and accent, better fed, and certainly better paid. And where were the Aussie boys? Spilling blood on foreign soil, while these Americans were on a cushy posting and not even seeing action.
Certainly when a Melbourne girl went out on the town, it was likely she'd meet a GI. Mrs. Ivy Violet MacLeod went out on Saturday, May 2nd. Around 5 o'clock, she went to see a friend with whom she stayed until 8. After that, she headed into the city, where she was seen by witnesses wearing a black dress with a lacy neckline. Ivy knew the area well. She'd worked there as a waitress in a cafe. Court transcripts from the day reveal that by 11 o'clock, Ivy was in the home of an aircraft mechanic that she had known for 7 months called John Patrick Thompson. He knew her as Ivy Darvigal, the maiden name that she'd used when out with him. He didn't know she was married. The couple intended to start a new life in New South Wales. As they made plans, dreamed of a new life, Eddie Leonsky tried to forget his.
The appalling things that Leonsky had suffered as a child were all locked up in his psyche, and he was a very troubled man. Not even drink would help him. The one source of comfort to him was his mother, and he was missing her rather badly.
Meanwhile, Leonsky trawled some exotic places, as well as some classic wartime bars where he liked to listen to women singing, and stayed late to do just that.
One of the most interesting features of Eddie Leonsky's story is his relationship with the female voice. He himself would sing with a very high-pitched female voice. You gotta imagine this is like a burly American soldier that would emit very, very high-pitched feminine tones. It sounds almost eerie, the idea of him almost trying to self-soothe in that way.
Across the street from where Eddie Leonsky was leaving a bar, Ivy was saying goodnight to John Thompson. He offered to walk her to the tram terminus, but she insisted she should go alone. She set off to catch the night tram and reassured John that she'd be fine. There were enough people about for her to cry for help if it was needed.
It looks like from the evidence that Ivy really wasn't worried about walking home on her own. She went off into the wee small hours toward the tram and didn't really want somebody to accompany her. Perhaps it was because she was a married woman and didn't really want to be seen with a man.
As she left the house in the Albert Park area of Melbourne, she may have caught a glimpse of an American GI, obviously drunk, walking away from the Bleak House Hotel. Or perhaps she didn't see him. It was 2:30 a.m. in the Brownout. It wasn't easy to see friend or foe, Australian or American. Her tram was due at 2:45, just 15 minutes to wait for her ride back to East Melbourne. Eddie Leonsky approaches her, asks if they can talk. He likes the sound of the voice of a woman.
At some point, she must have become frightened.
She has every reason to be. The mind of the man she's about to encounter is deeply troubled. Private Eddie Leonsky was a larger-than-life figure both at Camp Pell in Melbourne's Royal Park and in the town. He was physically well-built, working out every day. A striking character in the bars too, who enjoyed trying to outdrink those he met. He would get outrageously drunk. The next day he would remember little of what he'd done. One of his notable traits was to sing at an incredibly high pitch. Like his mother, he would say. Alcohol and the Leonsky family did not mix well. Indeed, there was much about the Leonskys that few knew about. Eddie was one of 4, 2 brothers and a sister, born to immigrant parents in New Jersey. He was considered the good one.
Eddie Leonsky's dad was an alcoholic who regularly beat up not only Eddie, but his other 2 brothers as well. So he would have grown up in that very violent environment. In fact, his mom tried to save herself and her kids from it by getting a divorce. But then what happens? She marries another guy who's just as violent, who beats up Eddie again. So those initial formative years around what his expectations were from parental love and from father figures would have began with that very violent overtone.
Perhaps not surprisingly, given such a tortured family background, Eddie Leonsky himself showed 2 distinct personalities.
Interestingly, when Eddie was sober, he was described as a really good soldier and a good guy, very affable and kind. But when he drank, things changed. And when he drank to excess.
He was an obsessive when it came to drinking. He drank just to get drunk.
We're not talking about 5 or 6 beers. We'd say that at any given time he could sit down with 36 beers interspersed with other concoctions with various different other spirits. So he was unable to stop once he started.
And he would make an exhibition of himself. He would do handstands on the bar, I believe, get into fights with people. The next day he would remember nothing.
Leonsky's obsessional drinking reveals much about the state of his mind and about what he had inherited and learned from his father.
If what you see around you is an appropriate way of coping with stress or tiredness or problems is through the use of alcohol. An appropriate way of being able to have fun is only when I'm drunk. An appropriate way of being able to have the confidence to approach a woman is only when I'm intoxicated. Then you learn that. And if you combine that with a predisposition to addiction and alcoholism, then you have a recipe for disaster.
Eddie had been bullied in his native New Jersey when a child and taunted for being a mother's boy. Leonsky's mother was heard by neighbours singing the teenage Leonsky to sleep, perhaps explaining his other obsession, the sound of a woman's voice.
Eddie would have seen this almost continuum from an idealized mother with a soft, sweet voice that would be there to save him, and then a very, very aggressive father that he had to hide from.
Alongside the violence ingrained in his home life, another ingredient was added to the cocktail that made up the mind of the heavy-drinking Eddie Leonsky.
All soldiers in wartime are trained to kill. The American GIs with Eddie Leonsky were in Australia. They hadn't seen action yet, but they're en route to the South Pacific. Eddie Leonsky knew how to kill.
Nobody in Australia or America truly has the full picture of Eddie Leonsky as he steps out eventually to meet Ivy McLeod. That he could kill is clear. That he loses control when drunk is obvious to all. That he has a bizarre fetish about women, nobody knows. What will happen when all three factors come together?
May 2 was a Saturday, and it was the night off for the men. Leonsky and his other 15,000 GIs in Camp Pell were sleeping two to a tent. They had to get out, so they went off into the bars and the pubs of the city to go drinking.
They headed for a bar in Beaconsfield Parade near the Melbourne waterfront.
They were drinking whiskey, and it's very likely that Leonsky was drinking for each whiskey a beer chaser.
So, in murky wartime Melbourne, a trained killer who lost control of his actions when drunk, which he was every night, and with a deeply unsettling range of psychiatric issues, was walking the streets. Late autumn was not a good time to be a woman out alone, which Ivy McLeod was, in the Brownout too. As his day had passed, Leonsky, true to form, had become more and more drunk. Witnesses saw him run out of money, borrow some from fellow soldiers, spend it on drink and then go find another bar. He had spotted Ivy as he walked from one of his many bars. As she considered heading home to East Melbourne, she was oblivious to the danger presented by the tortured mind of Private Eddie Leonsky. Eddie Leonsky spoke to Ivy McLeod sometime between 2:30 and 2:50 a.m. of May 3rd. Hours later, a grim discovery.
Just before light on May the 3rd, a barman at the Bleak House Hotel, where Leonsky had almost certainly been drinking, bent down to pick up something from the floor.
Opposite the hotel, he looked across and thought what he saw was a shop mannequin. Then he saw an American GI walking away, so he went over to the doorway to take a closer look.
It was a dead body, and I think that's where the nightmare that Australians are waking up to really begins. Ivy was found naked, her clothes strewn around everywhere, and was only wearing her belt, presumably because they couldn't get it off or didn't want to.
A barman, Harold Gibson, rang the police from inside the hotel. He picked up 2 bags and covered Ivy's body to protect her modesty. People were beginning to set off for work. He didn't want them to see the body.
So was it Leonsky? He'd been drinking that day and that night, but there was no record at that point of him ever attacking anybody, and it wasn't even really clear that there'd been a murder.
No records of attacks on women in Australia may be, but American GIs had all sorts of backgrounds that the Australian authorities knew nothing about. Leonsky had in fact almost been thrown out of the US Army for assaulting a woman in America. Though naked, an autopsy revealed that Ivy had not been sexually assaulted. Detectives assumed murder, but at first couldn't be certain. As for the American military authorities, on hearing the report of the witness, they simply refused to cooperate. How, in the brownout, could anybody see what nation's uniform the soldier seen running from the scene was wearing?
It was an absolute mystery. At that point, nobody suspected or even thought of suspecting Eddie Leonsky. The first person who went to talk to the police was John Thompson. But in actual fact, the way they made it sound was as if he was a suspect, but he'd been asleep all night and he didn't even know about the murder until his landlady told him the next morning.
The police had found evidence in Ivy's purse to lead them to discover her identity. They released the information, and the man she had spent that Saturday evening with contacted the police to tell them everything he knew. Another witness came forward saying that she had been approached by an American soldier that same evening. He'd asked her to go skating. She had refused, upon which, amazingly, the soldier simply said she was lucky. he'd planned on killing somebody that night. Australian detectives had heard enough to suspect an American soldier was involved in the death of Ivy McLeod. A few days later, medical investigators confirmed that Ivy had indeed been murdered. Her skull had been fractured, probably whilst she was being strangled.
Melbourne had a murder on the loose, and the evidence suggested that it was an American soldier. Now remember, in those days there was no DNA evidence, there were no CCTV cameras, they certainly didn't collect evidence in the forensic way that we did today. And add that to the fact that there were 15,000 American soldiers in the city.
And the American officers in charge were not in a hurry to help the Victoria authorities, which meant that the full story of the murders of the 3 Australians in 1942 has only recently come to light. Court documents, now digitised, tell how Leonsky was allowed to walk freely around Melbourne, even though he had actually confessed to strangling a woman when talking to a fellow GI. Later, some Australians would point to that incident as evidence that some American soldiers simply thought they could get away with murder. Private Anthony Gallo of the 52nd Battalion saw Leonsky drunk outside the tent that they both shared on May 9th. Leonsky said to him, "I killed Gallo, I killed." Gallo already knew Leonsky was capable of violence when drunk.
So Eddie kills, and he's actually very shaken about this because he goes back to his barracks, wakes up a fellow soldier, and confesses and says, "This is what I've done." Gallon doesn't believe him, thinks, okay, go back to sleep. This is ridiculous. But actually, this really had happened, and I think he, to some extent, may have been as surprised about what happened. He must have been coming down from what happened and needed to speak.
Amazingly, he confessed. But if he was the killer, he didn't convince his fellow American GI. Private Gallo heard his confession, but he told nobody.
Meanwhile, in bars and cafes across town, there were murmurings aplenty of where Ivy McLeod's killer had come from. America. And everybody knew what would be happening on a Saturday night in Melbourne. Lots of Americans would be out getting drunk, and lots of Australian girls would be on the town with them, including Pauline Thompson, who told her policeman husband that she was going to a dance at the Music Lovers Club in Melbourne. Pauline, who had 3 children, worked part-time as a receptionist at the Melbourne radio station 3AW and was planning a night out with the girls that she worked alongside. If asked, she would be giving her maiden name, O'Brien.
During times of war, we know that perhaps because death is so close in everyone's mind, that people are much more open to intimacy and human connection. So we know that extramarital affairs soar. And this night, Pauline was looking for that human connection. Her husband was away, and she had arranged to meet up with a GI and just basically just have a good time.
Eddie Leonsky was about to confront another woman, alone in Brownout, Melbourne, and he would again be drunk and in search of the sound of a woman's voice. Pauline Thompson was planning on meeting an American GI before going on to a dance club in Melbourne, but he was so late she went on to the Astoria Hotel bar. There, she was seen with an American soldier described as well-built.
Oh, this was classic young woman out on the town stuff. There was singing, there was dancing, there was partying. She loved gin and orange, loved gin and orange. It was wartime. Tensions were high and inhibitions were low.
Pauline and her American GI made an impressive couple as they sampled Melbourne's nightlife. Though she was from Bendigo, a 3-hour train journey north, Pauline lived in a Melbourne apartment house. Pauline Thompson was to die that night, May 9th. Her body was discovered on the steep steps outside of her home the following morning. It was precisely a week since the discovery of the body of Ivy MacLeod. She, like Pauline, had been strangled.
The second murder really struck terror into the community. It was revealed that the victim had been seen in the company of an American soldier, and she'd been stripped of her clothes and she'd been strangled.
Did Melbourne have a serial killer on its hands? It appeared that this killer might well be an American.
This really wasn't good for relations between the Americans and the Australians. They'd been trying to build bridges between them. For a little while, the Anzacs were known as the Yanksacks. And then the story breaks.
Police quickly announced that they were keeping an open mind about who the killer might be. They went on record to say that they believed either Mrs. Thompson was throttled by a stranger after she left the soldier to go to her apartment, or by a man whom she may have known, or simply someone waiting in the darkness near to her home. They were sure that she was murdered on the steps outside her front door, but they were sure of little else.
The Americans themselves were not about to go hunting through a camp of 15,000 soldiers with limited evidence, and so were rather reluctant to help the local police.
2 women were dead, but there were no suspects. How would Leonsky have been feeling? What was going on inside the mind of Eddie Leonsky? Again, he told his cellmate he had killed. Another confession. But why?
Whether a killer wants to confess or not varies. For some, they confess for narcissistic reasons. For others, they want to confess because it's too big. It's something that they can't control. Yet for others, keeping it secret is a means of control. Not just safety, but control, or even reliving it. I think in this case with Eddie, the confession was probably because he was literally sobering up to what he had done. Literally and metaphorically, he saw in the light of day that he'd taken this young woman's life.
The confession reveals a man at war with himself.
One of the things that he often described was this Jekyll and Hyde character. He saw this in himself. He saw the light and the dark. He saw himself when he was drinking, when he wasn't drinking, when he was violently aroused, when he wasn't.
Leonsky's confession fell on deaf ears. Is there a suspicion of a cover-up?
I don't think it was a cover-up, but I do believe, in retrospect, that if it had been 2 American women who'd been killed, Private Gallo's evidence, Private Gallo's story of the confession would have been passed on and more would have been made of it.
Instead, nothing was done or said, and Leonsky went about his business as usual. The investigating detectives asked for cooperation from their American colleagues in the military police and were allowed to take witnesses to Camp Pell, who watched soldiers march past. They were hoping to see if anybody could be picked out, but nobody recognized anybody who'd been with either woman on the night they were killed.
So Eddie Leonsky was basically allowed to go about his business, and for him that just meant getting more and more drunk, day after day, night after night.
Which put Gladys Hosking, a 40-year-old from Perth now living in Melbourne and working at the university's chemistry department, in grave danger one evening in May. Her father had received a letter from her saying she was nervous about walking alone at night in the city and always tried to travel with a companion.
By the 3rd week in May, women were really frightened of going out at night. The local paper, the Melbourne Argus, described it as a panic.
But Gladys, nervous or not, often found herself out at night. Keen on amateur dramatics and ballet dancing, she would regularly scamper across the city to meet up with people. On the 17th of May, a rainy evening, she left work walking with a friend under an umbrella. A short time later, she had dinner somewhere in the area of the Royal Park where Camp Pell was based, and not far from where she lived.
Gladys was seen later still walking under an umbrella. The person holding it was an American GI, and the witness said there was something protective about the way the umbrella was being held.
The witness was Private Malcolm K. Walsh, a military policeman.
It appeared that Gladys was not especially in danger. There had been a couple of murders, but there had been a couple of thousand dates between American soldiers and local women on the same night, and so the MP saw nothing especially to worry about.
Gladys walked away from Private Walsh and into the darkness of the brownout. It was May 17th, 14 days since the murder of Ivy MacLeod and 9 days since the discovery of Pauline Thompson's body. Both women had been walking alone in the darkness late at night. Both had been seen in the company of a handsome American soldier. Both were dead. What fate awaited Gladys? Melbourne was experiencing a wet and windy May in 1942, and the arrival of thousands of soldiers to the Royal Park had left the area very muddy. In the early hours of the 18th, Eddie Leonsky was stopped by an Australian soldier who was guarding military equipment.
The guard couldn't help but notice that he was covered in mud, head to toe. Then Leonsky asked him for directions back to Camp Pell, Area 1.
He seemed drunk, agitated, almost frantic. He was crying and speaking in an unworldly, high-pitched voice.
The voice he reverted to when he was drunk is telling. Leonsky was a man hugely influenced by an overprotective mother who sang him to sleep to soothe his anxiety in the face of a drunken, violent father. He was obsessed with women's voices, and on that night he was talking to people using a woman's voice.
When he eventually got back to his area, a guard told him to go and wash himself. He was so dirty. He told his tent mate that he'd fallen in mud.
Private Marcel A. Jasinski of Company B of the 52nd Signal Battalion of the US Army was stationed at Camp Pell along with Leonsky. He remembered seeing Leonsky entering the latrine and asking, "Where the hell have you been?" He just looked as if he was in a daze, he told friends. On the other side of the park, a gruesome discovery was about to be made. Gladys Hosking was found dead, strangled with her clothes torn about her in a muddy trench just 350 yards from her home and adjacent to the park. By her body, an umbrella inside of which was the local Melbourne Herald and a copy of that month's Women's Weekly. Her features were almost unrecognisable because of the mud which covered her face. Whoever had killed her also had to be covered in mud.
There was no way that Leonsky could not be connected with Gladys Hosking's murder. He was seen covered in mud, she was found covered in mud. He'd been seen walking the park, her body was found in the park. He was an American soldier, and she'd been seen walking with an American soldier.
And when Private Gallo heard the news about the latest murder, there was immediate realization that his tent mate perhaps had not been fooling around when he had said he'd killed women. He reported what he knew to his superiors. They, along with Melbourne detectives, turned all of their resources to Private Eddie Leonsky. They searched his tent. Inside, they found a Melbourne newspaper from May 5th, 2 days after Ivy MacLeod had been killed. The paper was open on the page that the article about her death was featured. Another newspaper was found, open again, at a story about the death of Pauline Thompson.
Once Leonsky had killed the third time, the case firmed up very, very quickly against him.
As soon as it was put to him that he was a killer, Leonsky put his hands up and said yes. He confessed immediately. It was almost as if it was a relief. And this isn't necessarily the case for many people in this situation. For a lot of people, there's a sense of, I need to hide it, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, it wasn't me. Nothing like this. Eddie wanted to say what had happened. In fact, he wanted to explain.
Ivy MacLeod, Pauline Thompson and Gladys Hosking had indeed been strangled by Leonsky, who had appeared to all of the women as an amiable American before becoming an assassin. The confession and a huge amount of evidence quickly unearthed meant that a conviction was inevitable, but there were still many questions.
Firstly, there was a very important point. Should he be tried in an Australian civil court, or should he be tried in an American military court?
And of course, there was this very pressing question about whether or not Leonsky was sane and he could be tried as a sane person.
The system was in uncharted territory. The politicians wanted the case tried in local civil courts, but this was a soldier under the jurisdiction of a foreign power, albeit an ally.
General MacArthur himself, leader of the Joint Services Command in the South Pacific, became involved. There was a real threat that anti-American feelings could get out of hand. He wanted Leonsky tried by Americans, convicted by Americans, and almost certainly executed by Americans. The Australian authorities gave way, still the only time a killer on Australian soil has not been tried by an Australian court. It's not possible to consider this case without also considering world events. At this point, Ivy, Pauline and Gladys are part of a bigger story. Melbourne, part of a theatre of war. Leonsky is a man few want to hang around. Is the Brownout killer expendable?
This was a problem that MacArthur just didn't need. The push against the Japanese had begun. Air raids were planned against Timor, about 600 miles north of Darwin. Anzacs and Americans were fighting side by side as the push against Burma was being planned. It was clear that this is something MacArthur just did not need.
Leonsky had one chance. A young counsel who would go on to be a major figure in United States legal and political circles was appointed to defend Leonsky. Ira C. Rothgerber would go on to distinguish himself as a tough Denver lawyer and to work for President John F. Kennedy. He was no shrinking violet.
This was this young man's first major defence case, and the person he was defending was facing the death penalty. It wasn't going to be a speedy trial. He was going to take his time, and he was going to be tenacious.
Because of this question of his sanity, Leonsky is seen by a psychiatrist in Melbourne, who actually goes on to say that he found him very friendly and actually in quite a good mood. Didn't in fact think he had any issues around sanity, that he was very sane, and in fact made the point that it was only when his mother was mentioned that he began to seem agitated, as if the biggest issue for Eddie was that his mom didn't find out he'd done something bad. That was the most important thing for him, which then begs the question, if he was being seen by a psychiatrist today, would the same questions have been asked? Psychiatry and psychology have evolved since then. We know more. And one has to wonder if there would have been more of a case made about his ability to take full responsibility over his actions.
Rothgerber probed and pushed for evidence of insanity and instability. Why would Leonsky get so drunk and lace alcoholic concoctions with such bizarre ingredients? Whiskey and beer with tomato ketchup, milk, mustard and gin. Why would he sing in a woman's voice? Why would he talk in general conversation using a woman's voice? And why would he always give the same reason for killing his victims?
So when he goes on to explain what happened, for example, with the first victim who was found with the belt, he makes a point of saying, I couldn't get the belt off. Just so you understand, it was her voice I wanted to take. And this happens with each and every victim. He goes on to explain that it was this voice, this softness that he wanted somehow to have, this thing that he kept emulating himself, soothing himself with these voices.
Would the court-martial agree that Leonsky was insane? If it did, it would mean Leonsky would not face the death penalty.
Now, Rothgerber felt very passionately that he shouldn't be held completely accountable, that his faculties were in fact compromised. And he refers to the psychiatrist's report and says, look, yes, you've said that he's a psychopath, but also you've made the point that it was because of the alcoholism, that if given the same situations, he could do this again. And if that's the case, can he in fact be held accountable? And he actually campaigns very, very strongly in the hopes that that this soldier won't meet the fate that was in front of him, which was the death penalty.
That expert conclusion was followed by two more, and all three concurred. They decided he was bad, not mad, and if allowed, he would do it again.
After the 4-day trial, the members of the court-martial required only 40 minutes to reach a verdict. Leonsky was ordered to stand before the president's table. He turned to Ira Rothgerber and asked if he could hold his hand. The pair stood, holding hands.
1 out of 4 of all of the jurors believed that he was in fact insane.
If the court were to split down the middle Leonsky might escape the death penalty.
Nobody from the families of the murdered women was present at the court-martial. Such niceties were not observed in wartime. The president told him, "Leonsky, it's my duty to inform you that this court, in closed session and upon secret ballot, with 3/4 of the members present concurring, found you guilty of all charges. I have to inform you also that this court, with all of its members concurring, sentences you to be hanged by the neck until you are dead."
Leonsky gave nothing away, emotionless.
The indefatigable Rothgerber petitioned for clemency. He called on President Roosevelt to commute the sentence to life in prison. Ivy, Pauline and Gladys had been killed, 3 innocents, but what was the point of executing a man with considerable and very damaging issues? Would his plea work?
This was a traumatic, life-changing moment for Rothgerber. He was a young, committed lawyer. It was his first defence, and the man he was defending could face hanging.
News of the verdict was greeted positively in the Australian press. The question of whether Leonsky would live or die would not be one answered by America's president.
He said this was a military matter, and it was something for General MacArthur to handle. The timing for Leonsky couldn't have been worse. A few weeks after the trial, Americans and Australian soldiers get involved in a firefight in Brisbane in a bar. Couldn't have been worse, the timing. An Australian was killed, and there we go. The relationship issue had reared its ugly head again.
General MacArthur never admitted it, but he wanted the story to end. He was determined to stamp down on anything that might drive a wedge between the Australians and the Americans.
Leonsky, the serial killer, would not have his life spared. MacArthur was in no mood to do anything other than serve military priorities.
So in the end, Eddie Leonsky, abused child, damaged man, killer, is sacrificed for American-Australian relations.
These are the men who are defending the aerial approaches to Australia. And here's real action. Jap plane spotted. In a matter of seconds, the anti-aircraft crews are letting them have it.
Leonsky was moved to Melbourne's Pentridge prison on November 9th, 1942. He said so long to his jailer, joking that he was going for a facelift and was hanged. But that was not the end of the story.
The terrible deaths of Ivy, Pauline and Gladys would end up changing American law forever. In 1951, the extraordinary work of Ira Rothgerber ended up creating the Uniform Code of Military Justice, law which is still in use today.
Eddie Leonsky was executed within 12 weeks of being sentenced and found guilty. He had carried out his series of killings in just 3 weeks. The deaths of Ivy, Pauline and Gladys at the hands of Eddie Leonsky could have been prevented if he hadn't been allowed into Australia in the first place. He had already attacked a woman in the United States. Ivy's tragedy was to be 15 minutes early for her late tram ride home. Pauline, looking forward to her new life in New South Wales, had been warned by her estranged husband not to go out with GIs. She didn't listen. And Gladys had even told her father how she was afraid of venturing out into Melbourne after dark. But she still did. She too was to become a victim of the Brownout Strangler, Eddie Leonsky. The snarl of a serial killer. Police officers who routinely arrest drunks and small-time offenders are about to hear the most chilling story of their lives.
This gentleman has been arrested on suspicion of assault, Sergeant.
The man in front of them has been captured on video flaunting a crossbow, and worse.
I'm authorising you to enter at the police station because of an allegation that you've assaulted somebody, so you're going to have to be interviewed about that matter. Do you understand that? Yeah, okay.
Where is a sex worker that he's enticed back to his flat? A macabre place, a shrine to his heroes.
On his walls, he had samurai swords, he had shelves of books on serial killers. It was like a den of dark arts.
And a place that he has lured the woman in this picture. Her life is in the hands of a man with a terrifying ambition.
He wanted to be celebrated for his accomplishments, but as a serial killer, so he sought infamy more than fame.
As he embarks on his ambition to become a man who murders, can anyone get inside the mind of a serial killer? Susan Rushworth is alone on a street at night, cold, underdressed, but sweating, at once frightened that a man will approach her, yet anxious in case one does not. She feels desperately lonely, angry. It's like that when she needs a hit of heroin. According to her brother, she'll do what it takes to get cash to pay for it.
I think she'll become more devious in the way she try to get money off people. She was so desperate for cash, she'd do anything for money, shoplifting or revert to prostitution to feed her habit.
Susan looks up, sees a familiar face. It is a man called Stephen Griffiths.
Susan might have had two kinds of relationships with him. Some sex workers went in for a cup of tea, pick up drugs. Others went there to sell sex. She might have been one who did both.
If she, like other sex workers, had been inside Griffith's den before, Susan will have endured an ugly ordeal.
He would show them videos featuring sadism towards women and read them passages from books about rape and mutilation and the murder of women.
That night, in June, she follows him, possibly suspicious, but unaware just how deeply disturbed he is.
Well, I'm misanthropic. I don't have much time for the human race.
Misanthropic, a general hatred of humans. What will the misanthrope do to Susan Rushworth? She is to look into the eyes of a man who has ambitions. He wants to become a respected academic. His speciality subject is a dark one.
Stephen Griffiths was actually a criminal psychologist and was doing a PhD, and the PhD was actually about the behavior of serial killers.
Homicide in an industrial city like Bradford, where he is now, was the title of his PhD. The content served as a killer's training tool.
What he did was off the scale.
All of those women who come into his company find him disorientating, dangerous.
They described him as incredibly controlling and unsettling. Once he'd given them money, he claimed the right to use them in any way he wanted. One woman said she felt less than human when she was with him. She was so relieved to get out of his flat.
So, just sometimes you killed someone to kill yourself, or killed parents. I don't know. That's like deep issues inside me.
Stephen Griffith's place on the list of infamous serial killers is guaranteed not simply because he killed 3 times, but because of his motive. He killed simply to become famous.
I think it's pretty clear that the first offence he committed, he'd already planned and decided where he wanted to go. He wanted to be infamous. He wanted to kill a number of people. And there's no doubt that if he hadn't have been caught, he'd have gone and killed, I'm sure, many, many more until such time as he was caught.
It is June in 2009 when Griffiths targets Susan Rushworth. She's vulnerable, not the same girl her family had known.
We had a really great life growing up. We played out most of the time. She was more like a tomboy. She wasn't like a sister, she was more like a brother.
A happy childhood is followed by a conventional start to her adult life. She marries, but it doesn't work out. A series of partners follow, one of whom introduces her to the world of drugs.
I think Susan started on smoking marijuana to start with, and that hit wasn't good enough. So then she started on heroin and crack cocaine.
Determined to get clean in the industrial city where she lives, she often returns to her family for encouragement to get better. One day, she disappears.
Susan went missing the day after Father's Day in 2009. It was a Monday. And she'd left my mother's house saying she was going to go get a methadone from the chemist in Bradford, and that she'd be meeting back up with my mum in an hour or so if she collected the methadone.
It wasn't the first time Susie had behaved this way. The family raise an alarm, but assume that Susan has returned to the streets to raise cash.
The police were every bit as worried as everybody else, but sex workers do come and go. It's a transient trade. They might just have moved on to practice in another town.
But as the days pass, there is no word.
Susan Rushworth went missing, so her family held a press conference. Nothing happened. Nothing was heard from her.
Had Susan come to any harm? There was no clear evidence of foul play at this stage, so Griffiths was not suspected of anything.
What has happened to Susan Rushworth? And what part has Stephen Griffiths played in the story? Stephen Griffiths lives in the heart of the very red light area of Bradford, West Yorkshire, where Susan Rushworth goes looking for business. As she does so, it is probable she meets Stephen, a regular user of sex workers, but it is highly unlikely she knows what's going on inside his damaged mind.
So Griffiths had a real fascination, not just with homicide, which he'd studied through his work with criminology, but actual serial killers. He was fascinated by the notoriety that went around them. He was fascinated by the fact that they'd be called certain names, that the press would be interested in them, that they would be elevated to almost a mythological status. Even though if they were feared, this wasn't the point. He was fascinated by the presence that they could hold over society as a whole.
This was the man who had spotted Susan as she stood alone, isolated, on the street, looking for a customer. She was in plain sight of another addict. Stephen Griffiths was not hooked on drugs. He was addicted to murder. What had made Stephen Griffiths into the man who sees Susan that night? His troubled ways begin when he's 17. Griffiths attacks a store manager with a knife, an assault for which he's sentenced to 3 years.
He was in fact diagnosed by a psychiatrist who actually raised the alarm bell, stating that this guy was seriously psychotic. And someone that perhaps wasn't immediately amenable to treatment. So, that history was there.
In later interviews, he reveals an obsession with murder and is described as a schizoid psychopath. He holds a girl at knife point, receives another prison sentence, this time of 2 years. By 2005, now out of prison, Griffiths stars himself as an academic. He is admitted for a PhD at Bradford University, researching his favourite subject: killers.
He was a deeply disturbed individual, obviously, but on the outside he seemed reasonably normal, bit of an oddball perhaps, but generally not beyond the pale.
Other students are in the dark about his past. He blends in.
So here was a man with deep psychological issues, and nobody could really tell.
Griffiths had partners, built relationships with fellow students, made friends like Delia Bartley-Perry, who he'd met on the club scene.
When I first got to know Steve, he was really cheerful, and he was always making jokes and having a laugh.
Life as a student gave him lots of time to enjoy the local club scene. He posed like a matinee idol. It's kind of posed and preened for photographs.
But he wasn't right with other people. He didn't like people very much. And he made no bones about that, he didn't like people. And generally I don't think people liked him.
They find him distant, menacing. He suffers mood swings around this time, a result amongst other things of his mental condition, one he was running risks with.
So he is prescribed medication at the time, but the question is he taking it? Is he adhering to the treatment? And the suspicion from professionals around him was that probably not.
And that fact might explain why his personality seemed to completely change.
He seemed to get more serious and nastier and more angry.
Stephen took offence very easily. He bore grudges. He wasn't an easy person to get along with.
It was almost like as things were falling apart for him, those things were becoming more exaggerated. So his behaviour towards people was becoming more exaggerated.
His fellow students did not know who they had in their midst. The medication had masked his menacing nature. As the terms passed, they moved on with their lives. Griffiths did not. By 2008, the diagnosed psychotic is spending long hours alone, sharpening weapons, honing his skills, and becoming morbidly intrigued by every aspect of the life of one of the subjects of his research project.
Stephen Griffiths actually had a hero, and his hero was Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. He had book after book about him. He was someone who he studied incessantly, that he was very fascinated with and perhaps even idolized.
In his flat, Griffiths is fighting demons. Around this time, he's reporting dark episodes.
He believes that bugs are crawling through his brain and that this is affecting his behavior. He can hear them, so he's got auditory hallucinations, so he's putting cotton wool in his ears. So right now we begin to see a genuine thickening of the psychosis that may have held him for a long time.
Using evidence gleaned from interviews with Griffiths and from studying his methods, police have pieced together events of June 29th, 2009. Susan Rushworth is on the streets, a familiar story for her brother.
Numerous occasions I'd see Susan out on the street, or the lane as they called it, selling herself, and I'd pass in a car and I'd stop occasionally and just ask her to stop doing it. And she's seen that she's in terrible danger. There must be another way, Susan. But she never could find a way to stop that.
Which makes her incredibly vulnerable. Griffiths leaves his flat. He spots Susan. Will he attack? Or will he casually approach her and invite her upstairs to his flat? Susan knows Griffiths, a fellow drug user. He may have had what she needs, or may pay for sex so she can use the cash to buy heroin. But it is a moment charged with portentous threat. Susan Rushworth's fate is no longer in her own hands. Stephen Griffiths has the defenceless Susan Rushworth at his mercy. In his flat, axes, hammers, sharpened swords. On the walls, posters of his serial killer heroes. Has he drugged Susan? Does she lie prone, powerless? Until now, he's only read about serial killers. In public, he is odd, but no threat. This is his big moment. His target meticulously selected, and he's alone with her.
I think when Griffiths was with a group of individuals, he probably presented very little danger because, of course, the chances of him getting caught are very, very high. He'll commit one offence, he'll get caught and he'll go to prison. What he did is he chose his time. He chose the vulnerable. His victimology was very much about choosing those where he had power and control over them. It was only when he was on his own and when he was in a position where he could offend that the real Stephen Griffiths came out.
He makes his decision.
He couldn't have chosen a more vulnerable young woman. She's very addicted to drugs. She has no one around her to protect her. She's, for all intents and purposes, living rough, needing every bit of money that she can to sustain this habit that's killing her. But it's not her habit that kills her in the end, but rather this very, very sick, disturbed man.
Griffiths has never fully revealed the horror of Susan's ordeal, but security cameras installed in his housing block captured him carrying out refuse bags. What was in them?
A few days after she disappeared, Griffiths is captured on security cameras. He's shown carrying bags, and we now are pretty sure that her body was in there in pieces.
As far as what happened to Susan, we're not 100% sure. He just admitted killing Susan with a hammer. And Griffiths has never said how he's disposed of Susan's body. I don't think he ever will. I think he's still got some kind of power over us by not telling us what's happened to Susan.
43-year-old Susan Rushworth needed a friend that night that she ached to feed her heroin habit. Instead, fate had sent her into the hands of Stephen Griffiths, a man determined to kill without conscience.
Why did you feel the need to kill her?
I don't know. I don't know if I was... So, just... Sometimes you killed someone to kill yourself, or killed parents. I don't know.
Was it easy to spot those deep issues? Apparently not. Friends who knew Griffiths well just before he began his series of murders knew nothing. He was described by his confidant from university days as someone who could be a lovely man. Theirs was a simple friendship, uncomplicated.
We'd never fancied each other. There'd never been that sexual attraction there between us. And I think I was safe. I was a safe friend.
But even the safe friend was to see an aspect of his darker side.
I never felt threatened or unsafe with Steve until I actually fell out with him myself. And then of course, it was a different matter. I kind of started stepping back from him, so I wasn't seeing him as much. He contacted me and asked me to get something for him. And against my better judgment, I tried. And it didn't work out. And he took the oath about it. And I lost my temper and basically told him some home truths.
Was she in danger?
Delia had no idea what she was dealing with.
I basically told him that he was like behaving like a spoilt little boy who couldn't get what he wanted, and you know that people didn't want to know him, and that he wasn't being very nice in uncertain terms. So he didn't take that very well.
She had no idea that at this point Stephen was actually thinking very seriously about how he was going to carry out a very violent attack, fantasizing about it, planning it.
Steve started a hate campaign towards me. He phoned up on my landline a couple of times, threatening me. I got some nasty emails, to which I replied and basically laughed at kind of what he was saying to me and arguing back.
It's amazing to think that at any moment he could have gone over the edge, and she was right in the middle of that.
Griffiths moved on from his former friend. It had been a lucky escape. Delia was never to see him again. Within a short time of the parting of the ways between them, he had begun his series of murders. Around this time, Griffiths is still learning his trade from his research for university, deciding who were the soft targets, how he could kill them, and he's learning from his heroes, especially about who to choose as victims.
He had a desire to join the roll call of past killers. And who did he target? Sex workers, just like the heroes of his past.
He is very clear about his adoration, his admiration for serial killers, for violence. He's going on websites and chat rooms. He's developing his own websites around it. He's, being aggressive in relationships. It's if you were to have looked at it again in retrospect, if you were to look back, you could almost see the clock ticking to him, doing something irrational.
Would Shelley Armitage be victim number 2? Shelley had been a bouncy teenager, again from a family devoted to her. Her sister remembers when things began to go wrong.
Shelley sort of met up with the wrong crowd of people. She was only 16 years old and just still so vulnerable. Only just left school. You know, I didn't realise what impact this was going to have on her life at the time, just of being such a young age.
Another heartbreaking story. This woman comes from, for all intents and purposes, what seemed like a very loving middle-class family, but gets embroiled in drugs.
She just basically started sort of staying in bed. You know, my mum and dad could smell sick in her bedroom, and we just knew, well, my mum and dad knew things just weren't right, really. She just sort of started changing as a person from being such a lovely, bubbly, outgoing person to somebody that were just sort of wanting to stay in bed, and just changed.
The sisters were particularly close. Gemma dreamed of being like her gorgeous elder sibling who seemed to have everything going for her, until she became addicted to a poison, one which would make her one day vulnerable to Stephen Griffiths.
She got involved in heroin, which at the time back then, it wasn't something that people were aware of. It was sort of, it's when the drug hit, like Bradford really. People wasn't aware of the damage it was going to cause. No one was keyed up on it. Nobody knew what it was. And, you know, it led from probably just 3 times that she ever took it to her getting addicted to it, which caused her to then end up having to steal, you know, to fund her habit, really.
Ends up having to work as a sex worker to sustain her habit, becomes extremely vulnerable.
Late in April 2010, Gemma and Shelley spoke. The family, always ready to help.
We always spoke on the phone, always. In fact, I spoke to her on the 26th of April that day. She called me that afternoon.
After that conversation, Shelley has a choice to make. As ever, she's welcome back home with her parents or with her sister. Instead, she chooses the best way that she knows to feed her drugs habit, to earn money from selling her body. She heads for the area known to attract cab crawlers, the area that Stephen Griffiths has made his home. As she stands on a curb looking up and down the road for a possible customer, Shelley Armitage is getting anxious. But there are no signs of business. Someone is watching her. From his vantage point, Stephen Griffiths has spotted her. He descends the stairs, walks along the corridor of his block of flats. He's captured by security cameras, leaves the building.
This is who he's preying on. He's preying on the most vulnerable people he can find, and that's who he finds.
Griffiths approaches her. Within seconds, Shelley Armitage has become the latest woman to enter the lair of a serial killer. Again, he has never revealed precisely what happens next. To the outside world and the family who loved her, Shelley simply disappears.
The day Shelley disappeared, her boyfriend made the initial phone call to the police to sort of say that she'd not been home, and my dad was then informed by our liaison officers, went to see my mum and dad to sort of inform that she was reported missing. Back then, that phone call really, in all fairness and honesty, I didn't think would lead nowhere near to what happened. You know, I thought that she might have just gone off on one, be somewhere. I don't know. I thought she might have just been with some friends. I didn't read into it anyway. I didn't read into it at all. It worried me a little bit, but you know, this has happened before. We've had sort of experiences like this before, so I just thought she would turn up.
But she would not turn up. Griffiths has killed again. It is likely that within minutes of entering his flat, Shelley has become victim number 2 of Stephen Griffiths. But again, the nature of his victim's life means that no one knows.
It wasn't until maybe sort of a week into it, we then started to realise things were not right. She'd not claimed her benefits, which was out of the ordinary for her. She didn't collect her methadone, which is the medication she was on through the drug problem. So then we were sort of realising then that there was something sort of not right.
Gemma set off on a one-person crusade in search of her sister. She was to uncover a desperately sad turn of events. She spoke to other women who were working the Bradford sex trade. Had they seen her?
Drive around the streets day and night, asking the same question to all the girls up there, but none of them just could give me any answers. None of them, you know, they were all just as shocked and wanted to know where she was as much as me.
And they revealed a bitter, tragic irony. Someone had tried to rescue Shelley from the streets that night.
Each evening, a charity in Bradford patrol the streets of the red light district. They're looking for people down on their luck, people working in the sex trade who might need a hot meal, a warm drink, a bed for the night.
A short exchange almost certainly witnessed by Stephen Griffiths as he spied on his latest prey. In his own mind, he's on the way to emulating a hero, creating his own reputation.
Shelley Armitage's life ended the night she entered Griffiths' flat. We'll probably never know how he killed her. It could have been a crossbow, he might have used his swords, bludgeoned or strangled her to death. We just don't know.
Those who later investigated Griffiths' behaviour established other ugly truths. Griffiths is cutting up his victims' bodies, keeping some parts back, and then throwing the remains into the nearby River Aire.
I think what Stephen does here is for most people beyond comprehension. He doesn't just kill this young woman, but he cuts her up. He puts parts of her in bags to dispose of like garbage, and then he keeps some for himself to have as a kind of trophy.
It is April 2010 and Stephen Griffiths has now killed twice. Who would be next?
So is this the end of the story? I think very much in this case it's just the beginning. It's now about ensuring that he's a serial killer. He needs to do this again. He needs to do it in a similar way. He needs to build up this persona that he's planned for so long.
Suzanne Blameyer's life story is again of a woman from a respected, hard-working family.
Suzanne Blameyers was Bradford born and bred, trained to be a nurse, but then she fell foul of drugs. So by now 2 women had gone missing. Nobody had made a connection.
Thrown out of college, Suzanne's life entered a downward spiral. She would become another vulnerable sex worker doing what she could to get the cash to buy drugs. She fitted the tragic profile of victim that Stephen Griffiths would target. And one night, after seeing her chatting to another sex worker, Griffiths decides that Suzanne will be victim number 3. Again, unwittingly, Suzanne makes it easy for him. She works the streets adjacent to his flat. He approaches her. He's on home turf, dangerous ground.
It's an area where serial killers have preyed on sex workers before. It's the place where the infamous and appalling Yorkshire Ripper cruised the streets.
And of course, where Griffiths lived. He sees her, invites her to his flat.
Desperate for money, Susan Blameyers walks back into Griffiths' flat. She knows it's dangerous, but she decides to take the risk.
What she does not know is of Griffiths' armoury. He has an arsenal of weapons, including one which can kill at the squeeze of a trigger, and which he lawfully owns.
Lethal, but a perfectly legal weapon. He kept it in fantastic condition, oiling it and practicing with it in the woods outside the city.
After killing first Susan Rushworth, then Shelley Armitage, Griffiths' bloodlust was up. As they returned to Griffiths' flat, it is likely he tried to put Suzanne at her ease. Other sex workers he approached spoke of how he would at first seem calm, easygoing. Griffiths opens the door, and inside within a moment, Suzanne will have seen the weapons that he has adorning the walls.
On his walls he had samurai swords, he had books and shelves of books on serial killers. It was like a den of dark arts.
Given his violent criminal record, should someone somewhere have known of his dark fascination with lethal weapons? Not necessarily.
I can tell you I've been to many people's addresses who have guns, who has knives, who have all kinds of violent equipment there. And there's actually no evidence, and there's never been any, that these people go on and commit other offences. So the fact that he had a crossbow in his flat would not have indicated in any way that he was likely to have used it. Because, of course, the majority of people who have these weapons, they don't go on and commit any horrendous offences with them. The small minority do. It's not a criticism you can necessarily apply to the police, the fact that he had these weapons, that nothing was done with them.
Suzanne Blears, therefore, is part of a scene where Griffiths' behaviour remains unchecked, unsuspected, as she arrives in his flat. She may wish to leave, but either because he does not let her go, or because she still does not know the level of danger that she faces, Suzanne remains in his flat. She's done this before, had sex with oddly behaved men. She's always been fine, walked away with the money that she needs to buy drugs. She holds her nerve, takes a few more steps. Griffiths has done this before too. Sometimes he's had sex, other times he has subjected the woman to an ugly ordeal of intimidation.
So he degrades them, he treats them very badly, very violently. It's almost as if he's finding a way of dehumanizing, he's finding a way of relating to these people as their controller, as someone that has all the power over them, as someone that takes pleasure from their pain.
On some occasions, he uses that control to allow women to go free. But sometimes he kills. It is after midnight. Which course of action will Stephen Griffiths decide upon as he eyes up the tiny Suzanne Blears? What is about to happen to Suzanne Blears will become all too clear to investigators.
Griffiths had a secret past. Management at the housing project where Griffiths worked installed cameras because they'd heard of the prison sentence that he'd served.
The cameras captured Griffiths' comings and goings. They're about to record a horrifying ordeal. Stephen Griffiths is no stranger to drugs himself.
He was a heavy drug taker, a lot of prescription drugs, uppers, downers. So he'd have something to get himself up, then something to get himself to sleep, ecstasy, speed, and then later on ketamine as well.
His dependency on drugs puts him in a half-world of reality and of imagination, one he reveals online.
The other thing that we see during this time is a real obsession with violent imagery. In fact, he designs websites that are solely concerned with crossbows and with killings, with murder. Very graphic content, very violent content. This is something that he's surrounding himself with. Why is he surrounding himself with this content? Is it about playing it through in his mind before he does it? Does it give him a sense of comfort? Is it about a plan? Is it about establishing the identity? Is it about practicing before he does it?
The fate of Suzanne Blears is now in the hands of a killer, one for whom savagery has become the norm, online and off. She realises that she's in danger and makes a run for it. He follows, armed with the crossbow, into the corridor where he knows there are cameras.
The security camera was pointed in his direction. He must have wondered, is it switched on? Will the tapes be checked?
I think what Stephen does here is for most people beyond comprehension. He doesn't just kill this young woman.
Suzanne Blears was shot through the head. He actually made a triumphant gesture at the camera after he killed her.
And his method of killing, almost certainly he had loaded an arrow into his crossbow and fired at point-blank range into her head.
After he kills, he actually goes out of his way to be seen on camera. He's beginning at this point to want to imagine himself, how he's seen by other people. He's beginning already to imagine how his crimes will appear, how he will appear. So it's an establishment of an identity he's been actually seeking for a very long time.
More gruesome behaviour was to follow. Stephen Griffiths will soon reveal himself not as simply a killer, but as a cannibal. He will dismember the body of his latest victim, he will devour body parts. When checking the contents captured on security cameras, a guard sees the horrific events which have unfolded and reports to police. Griffiths is soon arrested.
This gentleman's been arrested on suspicion of assault.
He mumbles a need for a drink. It's all very routine.
Stephen, if you just get back proper counter, just behind this white line for us. Just keep your hands down by your side.
What's your surname, please? Griffiths.
And then the interrogation begins. Far from trying to hide the truth, Griffiths slowly begins to reveal slivers of it, careful to talk about only what he knows detectives will probably discover. For example, that he'd set fire to part of his flat.
What were you setting things on fire for?
Well, to destroy DNA, but like I say, in such a reckless, crazy manner. I can't believe, mind you, I don't know, I think, like I said, caretaker perhaps had other things on his mind, but otherwise I can't believe, you know, with the smoke that must have been billowing out of the windows. Although I did keep them shut for a while as well, so that's why I got a lot of soot all over me, and eventually I got a breathing mask on.
Ever the gloating expert, Griffiths at times talks like a PhD research student.
So, how would you know that the fire destroys DNA?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I mean, that was something I always kept meaning to check up on the internet, but it was just an assumption that, well, certainly I think the principle I operated on was, well, it certainly isn't going to enhance the quality of the evidence.
Police become anxious to uncover the whereabouts of the remains of the girls to help the families gain closure. Griffiths keeps back this information, a means of control.
And what sort of location have you put them in? If you can't tell us where, what sort of location have you put them?
I don't know. Where a robot, where a computer would put it. You know, a rational, emotionless aberration would put it.
Why did you feel the need to kill her?
I don't know. I don't know if I just sometimes you kill someone to kill yourself or kill parties. I don't know. That's like deep issues inside me.
So why did you feel the need to kill any of the girls? Pardon?
I don't know. Well, I'm misanthropic. I don't have much time for the human race.
Griffiths reveals just enough to establish to police that they're dealing with a multiple murderer. He's still hiding much, but he freely confesses to the killings.
He was very open in an awful lot of his killings, the way that he committed his offences, and he'd almost thrown in the towel. But I think at that point, he'd reached his notoriety. He'd got to the point where he knew he couldn't continue any further. And as a result of that, by giving up and offering the information, it enabled him to go down in history like some of his other people that he's followed. For example, Peter Sutcliffe.
He will have known that he was being recorded. Suspects are normally told. And Griffiths regarded himself as something of an expert in police procedure, and he would have been playing up to the cameras.
What's your surname, please? Griffiths.
Many people will know about Peter Sutcliffe. How many people remember his victims? But of course that's what happens. You remember the offender, not the victims. And you're more likely to remember the offender if they come into custody and tell you the gravity and the gruesomeness and the horrific nature of their offending.
And this is the point where he begins to hold court. This is something that not only has he studied for years, but rehearsed in his mind. He actually plays around with the investigators, saying things like, you should have caught me sooner. It sure took you a long time. I mean, think about it. There was smoke coming out of my apartment when I was cooking these bodies. Why didn't you find me sooner?
Can't believe, mind you, I don't know, I think, like I said, caretaker perhaps had other things on his mind, but otherwise I can't believe, with the smoke that must have been billowing out of the windows. Although I did keep them shut for a while as well, so that's why I got a lot of soot all over me, and eventually I got a breathing mask on.
Seemingly relaxed and drinking tea, Griffiths reveals a string of revelations. Apparently he had a stove in his flat with which he would cook the victims.
He goes into meticulous detail, probably as a means of showing them that he can remember that he did engage with all these details, therefore he is in control and he is able to give this to them, but also because his agenda has always been not just to be a killer, but to be a notorious, infamous killer. And if he's going to be that, they need to know that somehow he was special and different and pushed the boundaries to the nth degree. So he tells them about these details. He tries to shock them.
Griffiths plans one last triumph, a final act to fulfill his ambition to become not simply a serial killer, but one who will find a place in the Hall of Infamy. His day in court offers him that chance. He gives himself a name, a mantle, like his hero, the Yorkshire Ripper.
So what's this final act that will allow him to be a part of criminal history forever and ever? Of course, it's to give himself a name, a title. And where does he decide to do this? In court. When he's asked for his name, he stands up and very calmly introduces himself as the Crossbow Cannibal.
When he said he was asked to give his name and he called himself the Crossbow Cannibal, was just disgusting, really. You know, it was heartbreaking. We'd already been through enough, and to have to listen to him say something like that was just horrible. I thought that I was actually hearing things at first, and it wasn't until I looked round at everybody else that I realised what he said was true. Everybody was just shocked, and it wasn't until then I sort of realised what a real sort of Jekyll and Hyde person we was dealing with here.
The only real issue related to Stephen Griffiths for the following court case to consider was his sanity. A psychiatric report had described Griffiths as psychotic many years earlier, but the court found that he knew precisely what he was doing. Griffiths consciously decided to kill, again and again. He was sane enough to cold-heartedly pursue an ambition.
Stephen Griffiths achieved his ambition to follow in the footsteps of the men he so admired, the murderers to whom he built a shrine.
In this age of celebrity, young people dream about being celebrated for their accomplishments, for singing, for dancing, for acting. He wanted to be celebrated for his accomplishments, but as a serial killer, so he sought infamy more than fame.
Stephen Griffiths became a rare inmate in Britain's prison system. The judge ordered 3 life sentences to be served concurrently with a whole life tariff. He will never be eligible for parole. Darkness falls in Delhi. The cool of the evening offers a chance to cruise the streets for old and young. But hiding in the shadows, Surendra Koli, a man whose mind is full of the images of children. Children that he had slaughtered.
This was a man who came from one world and left for another. And if that wasn't difficult enough, he found that the world he entered was full of depravity.
As they had ventured onto the streets, the unsuspecting were wide-eyed with excitement, oblivious to the threat posed by Surendra Koli.
He'd lure the children back to the bungalow with sweets, with toffees, with offers of chocolate.
Over 2 years, 19 were to disappear. Koli went unsuspected as parents accused police of indifference to their plight.
This is every parent's worst nightmare. Your child goes missing. You don't know where they are, but worse than that, it seems that no one's listening.
Did one of India's worst serial killers stand out from the crowd? Anything but. Even when confessing, his voice calm, unemotional, normal. Could anyone get inside the mind of a serial killer? In 2005, 2 girls went missing from an area of Delhi. The neighbourhood, originally a village called Nithari, is one where poorer people do what they can to make ends meet. Some, like the Lal family, serve the growing numbers of middle-class professionals by taking in their laundry. One of the jobs given to Jyoti Lal, the family's oldest daughter, was to deliver the freshly cleaned and pressed linen to customers. One day, she became yet another to simply disappear.
तो मैं कहा भी पकड़ के साथ ही ले जाएगा कोई तो कहीं कोई मिल ही जाएगा लेकिन वो पकड़ के क्या लगा तो पकड़ के कोठी में मार दिया तो कहाँ पता लगेगा बाहर में.
From a parent's perspective, it's a moment not just of utter panic, but of huge vulnerability. What do? Your child's gone missing. You can't find it. People aren't really taking heed. So how impotent, how frantically worried, how guilty must you feel?
Had she become the latest victim of Surendra Koli, a man who began life in a tiny, remote village? There, he learned how to butcher.
He used to help his father. He used to skin them, cut the parts of the body of the animal, and then he will remove the flesh from the bones and sell that.
One day, hundreds of miles away in a giant suburb called Noida, he would use those skills to dissect the bodies of children.
There wasn't one victim, there were many. Every second parent, not only in that sector, from whole of Noida.
What makes Surendra Koli even more horrifying? He was a cannibal, eating the organs of some of his victims. The trigger?
Koli was seeing highly sexualized behavior, probably for the first time in his rather sheltered life.
Surrounded by sex, he was unable to do anything about it. With older women, he was impotent.
He had a sexual deviancy that made him perhaps unable to perform with women his own age.
Nobody knew of the turmoil developing in the mind of Surendra Koli, who, by 2005, was killing at a rate of 1 child a month. Koli selected victims at random. He showed no emotion, no mercy, as he cut up their bodies.
It was a gruesome murder. It was the brutal murder that ever I heard about it. It was worse than any other incident that I covered.
As the grotesque series of murders came to light, the questions. What had shaped the mind of a man who killed 19 times in just 2 years? Koli was moulded in 2 very different worlds, new and old India, urban and rural.
This is somebody who's grown up in the foothills of the Himalayas, a very, very different place to where he is now in the middle of Delhi. Different in terms of how people speak to each other, what they expect of each other, different in terms of the sights, the smells, the cultural norms, the social norms.
It's a hard world if you're poor, and most people are. Just getting through the day is quite a challenge.
So this is somebody who is, for all intents and purposes, trying to take on a new persona, trying to find his way in this new part of the world.
Culturally, northern India couldn't be more different to the urban areas. Wander out of your village, you could be eaten by tigers, leopards. There was no internet, there was no TV. Suddenly this boy was thrown into the dazzle of Delhi.
A key ingredient in the events which are to follow Koli's move to the city is social class.
He comes from a social caste in India called the Untouchables. Now, very sadly, this is seen as a social group that is so below everybody else, that they're apart from the norm, that they shouldn't be interacted with, that they should do the most menial jobs, the jobs that no one wants to do. And this is a young man that clearly is trying to shake that off somehow. This is something that he's aware of, but clearly isn't happy with. He wants to move forward. He wants to do things that other people do.
Serial killers seldom stick out in the crowd, but go back to Koli's childhood and some unsettling signs do appear.
The person is introverted, not very good in studies, and he's not very sociable, have very limited social interactions, limited financial resources, limited experiences, and he did not have lots of warmth because he was not close to his family. He didn't have many friends at all.
An introvert with few friends. Hardly enough to explain what made Surendra Koli a serial killer. It was what happened next which tells more about the shaping of his mind. When he reached 13, Surendra left for the urban sophistication of one of the world's fastest growing economies, Delhi, a 450-kilometre train ride away. It was some culture shock. In the city, Koli eventually got a job as a servant in bungalow D5 in the rapidly modernising Noida.
He was staying alone as a domestic help in this particular household, and his family was away in the village.
He would cook, clean and do odd jobs for Monandir Panda Singh, a well-travelled businessman, a man who would introduce his young assistant to a very different world from the one he was used to, a world of networking, parties, a very adult world. Two very different men, Koli, the poor boy from the sticks, and his very worldly boss.
Panda was a player. He liked to be connected with the business elite, the political elite of the city. He held parties and he liked to bring girls back for sex.
So the country boy was not just encountering the pace and explosion of activity in the big city, he was encountering some of the truly dreadful things that take place there as well.
Panda, the sophisticated businessman with the big house, Koli's de facto life mentor, was setting a very bad example.
Because his employer is seen as someone of a higher caste, as someone of more means, as someone of more respect, it's perhaps even making it something to look up to, something admirable.
So the developing picture of Surendra Koli had taken a sordid and significant turn for the worse. The once naive country boy would welcome prostitutes into the home of his rich boss. At the same time, a macabre number count of missing children had begun. 2 had disappeared, and now Jyoti, the laundryman's daughter, was missing. Before he struck again, could anyone uncover what was going on inside the mind of a serial killer? By spring 2005, Surendra Koli had lured at least 2 children to their deaths in bungalow D5. Police simply refused to take seriously the stories of young ones disappearing.
This was happening in the poorer parts of Delhi. Children were disappearing, sometimes weekly, and there were cries of despair from parents who were going looking for these missing children. It was horrifying.
Amongst those missing was the daughter of Jabu Lal. Jyoti Lal was 10 when she set off to deliver laundry. Amongst the homes she would visit, bungalow D5, just across the street.
छत पे खड़ा होता था, कभी गेट पकड़ के खड़ा रहता था, वो भी कहीं जाता ही नहीं था। और अक्सर करके जब हम कभी तक ज़्यादातर गए तो जो है नौकर गेट पे भी खड़ा हो या कहीं जैसे तो देखो कोली जो है पंडित ये अपने गार्डन में बैठा होता था।
With news circulating of children disappearing, should the Lal family have been more careful? Jyoti more on her guard.
There's nothing to suggest that Jyoti would have herself felt uncomfortable doing this. Young children look to their parents as sort of barometers to gauge whether they should be worried or not. Given that her parents were comfortable with her doing this route that she'd done many times before, there's nothing to suggest that Jyoti wouldn't have seen this as just any other day.
Why did nobody suspect Koli? Because he simply blended into the crowd. Nobody to worry about.
Surendra Koli was not somebody you would expect to be afraid of. He was slight in build, a very diligent boy, altogether rather unremarkable.
रोज अब काले शीशे की गाड़ी आती थी, डॉक्टर आते थे, लेकिन ये नहीं पता बोलने चालने में बहुत अच्छा से बोलता था, इसलिए तो भी कोई साबित नहीं करा।
Jyoti Lal never came back from her laundry drop.
We still don't know what happened. She just never came home.
She had simply disappeared in the hustle and bustle of a busy working afternoon. And nobody had even noticed that she had walked through the neighbourhood.
The way that this little girl had disappeared, it was almost as if she'd been photoshopped out of her family, out of her society, out of her surroundings. She was just gone. 1 minute there, 1 minute not. And actually, I think the most difficult thing when you look at this case is that there was a sense of, well, you know, these things happen. What are you going to do? Maybe you didn't take good care of her. So these people, this family, wasn't just faced with the pain and the anguish of not knowing where their child was, but also with the minimization of this enormous event by those around them, kind of just saying, you know what, you should have taken better care of her.
Jyoti's parents ran from house to house, including bungalow D5, where Koli opened the gate.
अच्छा से बोलने में साबित नहीं किया, नहीं कभी कहीं ही पता लगे। हमने अपनी लड़की के बारे में ये पूछा, अरे भाई यहाँ तुम लोग खड़े, तुम ज़्यादातर खड़ा रहता, भाई यहाँ कोई लड़की को भाई पकड़ के तो नहीं ले गया है, ज़रा कोई ध्यान रखना, आप कोई मिल जाए तो ध्यान रखना, हम तुझे 50,000 रुपये देंगे, खाली नाम नहीं आने देंगे, बता देना तो फला आदमी ले गया है, उसका थोड़ा पता लगाओ। तो कहने लगा ठीक है, अरे अब कहाँ मिलेगी, कैसे मिलेगी, ऐसे ऐसे करके चल जाता था।
Must be so hard to imagine what Mr. Lal would have been going through. This is a man who ran his backstreet laundry like most kids. His children helped him out with it as they got older, delivering fresh laundry. This is somebody that life was based on routine and expectations of who he was, of who he was supposed to be, what would happen to his children, and then this happens.
10 साल की थी, मैं 1 साल 7 महीने ढुनाई की, उसके बाद में ये केस खुला।
Still, local police simply did not begin an investigation.
Whether because the family were reporting were poor or whether the police actually believed that this child had run away, the truth is that absolutely nothing was done. No searches, nothing. The terrible thing was that this child was on the streets, walking the streets 1 minute, and the next minute she was gone.
It was the work of Surendra Koli. By now the neighbourhood was raw with pain, parents bewildered by events. None knew what Koli was doing, snatching children, killing them, and more.
3 तो हमारे से पहले खो चुके थे, 3 के जानकारी में इसी लाइन से खोए हुए थे। एक रीपा हंतर की लड़की, नील हल्दर की लड़की, एक उसकी देखो, और एक है उसका दुर्गा प्रसाद, उसकी लड़की, 2-3 और एक पायल, ये 3 तो यहाँ खोई है। उसके 3-4 खोने के बाद में हमारी लड़की खोई है। तो यही आते थे, सब कहते थे यहीं तक हमारी लड़की आई, यहीं से नहीं पता लगा, यहीं तक देखा गया, उसके बाद नहीं पता लगा। आखिर जो फिर हमने कहा था यहाँ से जैसे आते थे पूछने, भैया देखा क्या? मैंने कहा मैंने तो नहीं देखा। आखिर हाल में वो 3-4 के नंबर बाद में हमारे ही आ गया।
The notion of being a parent's worst nightmare, it's often said, is not an understatement. It is a nightmare. To have a child disappear is horrific and terrible and hugely painful, and you're also left with the pain of not knowing what happened. What could I have done differently?
In a bitter irony, when a girl goes missing in parts of India, it does not necessarily follow that she's been killed.
It's a horrendous fact of life in India, but children are actually snatched for the sex trade. For the family, though, it meant a little bit of hope because maybe she wasn't dead.
And as the weeks and months passed, this bungalow seemed to be at the centre of the mystery.
Despite the traumas and tragedies developing all around, girls would still be shipped into parties at Bungalow D5 for the amusement of Monandia Panda and his friends. Koli would watch.
One of the very important factors is that probably he had a lot of sexual impulses, which he was getting through the environment, because seeing his boss who had a lot of extramarital relationship.
Bungalow D5, Koli's now exposed to things that he probably couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. He's exposed to sex parties. This is a young man trying to make sense of this new world within the context of what he's seeing around him.
So that was one thing which was, he found that in the environment there were a lot of sexual stimulation was there and he was not able to gratify.
Panda was not always at home. It meant that throughout this time, Koli spent a lot of time alone.
Panda Singh, Koli's boss, had a lot of overseas business interests, and he was often away from home, places like China, Australia, Canada, United States, and very often Koli would be left in the house alone.
Can you imagine? You're given the keys to the mansion, you've got the run of it, you're a poor boy from the sticks. What would you do?
So Koli had time in his hands and nobody to see what he got up to. He was a very different person from the rustic who had left for Delhi 20 years ago.
Surendra at this point is living in a very paradoxical world. On the one hand, he's being surrounded by sort of this decadence and opulence, these sex parties, women in amazing dresses, a lot of money. He's not partaking of this, so he's very much a voyeur. He sits back and he watches.
In the midst of the child snatching, the murder, the sex acts, and then the butchering of children's bodies, Koli would return regularly to his rural roots. By now, back in his home district of Almora, deep in the countryside, he had a wife. There, he had conquered his impotence, fathered 2 children.
Then he'll go back home and he'll be in the fields and, looking at women picking crops and taking care of kids, a huge juxtaposition between the two. This is someone who's trying to figure out into which world he belongs, because he's actually immersed in both, but actually not partaking in either. He's a watcher in one, and he feels like a stranger from where he used to be in the other.
After a weekend at home, Koli would journey back to the city. Each month, another child would go missing. By May 2006, the number count was 10. Most of the disappearances occurred in the same neighbourhood, but the police was still doing nothing. Koli was never interviewed, not suspected, but then nobody was.
There was a systematic failure of the authorities. By now it's 2006 and 10 children, 10 boys and girls have just disappeared. The police did nothing. They interviewed nobody. They didn't warn parents to keep their children off the streets. Nothing happened.
After yet another disappearance, it took a call to a journalist to prick the conscience of the local authorities.
One of the family members, a brother of one of the girl who was killed in this incident, Rajesh, he contacted me as a journalist. He felt somewhere that if it goes to media, if it is being reported, probably police and investigators will come out and help him. That was the hope that he had.
It was a forlorn hope. Despite all of the disappearances happening around Bungalow D5, neither Panda Singh nor Surendra Koli were spoken to by local police.
police were coming out with all wrong kinds of theories also, since the girl in concern, Rajesh's sister, she was not a minor. They came out with different stories that probably the girl has run away.
Jyoti Lal's parents returned to the bungalow regularly, often seeing Koli.
गेट पे खड़ा के मनिंदर गेट पे खड़े थे, बोले बाबूजी इधर जो लड़की आई थी क्या? बोले नहीं, यहाँ तो नहीं आई है। 10 बार गई पूछने,
पंडेर से भी पूछा,
गेट पे खड़े बार जान घूमने, कहा बाबूजी आई है क्या लड़की? नहीं, यहाँ तो नहीं आई है, यहाँ तो नहीं आई, ऐसे बोले। वहाँ गार्डन में बैठा 10 बार पूछे जाके मनिंदर।
The level of despair on the streets ran deep. As time passed, another 2 children snatched. By mid-2006, the number count of missing children ran to 18, and still no one attempting to discover what was going on inside the mind of Surendra Koli. How many more would he snatch? How many more would he kill? Nathari's infrastructure is bursting at the seams, and over the 2 years of 2005 and 2006, these drains finally began to give up the ugly truths and dark secrets about the lives of some of its citizens. Surendra Koli and his boss Panda Singh were at home late in 2006 when the police knocked on the door. A teenage girl called Payal had gone missing and had last been seen entering bungalow D5. Both men denied any knowledge of the girl. The next day, a fearsomely hot one, locals detected an overwhelming stench from somewhere near the bungalow. Thinking it may have been a dead animal, they probed the drains. They were to make a grotesque discovery.
Huge drain, and there were bones floating in the water. Bones of children.
As police descended on the scene, more skeletal remains were uncovered. Surendra Koli and Manandya Panda were arrested. There were near riots against the actions of local police, who'd done nothing as 19 children, mostly girls, but with some boys, had gone missing.
The area around bungalow D5 was seething with anger. People were furious because they didn't believe that the rich Pandya could possibly be innocent, and they thought that the police had allowed Koli to get away with what he did because the children, the victims, were untouchables.
The case was handed to the National Police, the CBI. Both Koli and Panda were kept in custody and questioned. Hardened detectives like Arun Kumar were as sickened as the rest of India.
Naturally, a human being, it affects you after you handle the case also. It's very difficult to switch off, and that gives you some sort of very sick and depressing feeling that what is happening in the society, and the black aspect of, the dark aspect of the human behavior naturally disturbs you.
Detectives worked on the theory that both Koli and his boss were responsible, but what could have been the motive? An appalling trade has emerged in India in recent years. Around the time of Koli's arrest, police had become aware of backstreet clinics with a demand for organs. No questions asked about where they had come from.
At first, they suspected that organ trafficking might have been the motive, but that didn't really make sense because so many of the organs had been discarded in the drains. Then they wondered if child pornography might have been the motivating factor.
There were more questions. Chiefly, was it one man or both? And could it really all be true? Neither man had confessed.
So heinous were these crimes, so unbelievable, that actually there was a huge sense of confusion when the investigators began to accumulate more and more information. They were confused about, what was this Koli? Was this Panda? Was this girls and boys? Was there sex before? Was it after? Are we getting this right? There was a real sense of disbelief about, I think, the proportion as well as the violence. This was 19 kids that had gone through this.
He's a very simple person from hills. Normally the hill people are very simple people. That too from a poor background. doing a household job, obeying the instructions, not raising voice, not asking questions. So I will find him a very, very, very simple person. And that's why everybody was not believing that such a simple person can commit so many horrendous murders under one roof from last 2 years.
So, early theories suggested to police that Koli had not been a sole serial killer, if he'd been one at all. His boss was, however, definitely in the frame.
The reason that they thought it was Pandya was because he was rich. He was used to buying the company of women.
Detectives who interviewed Koli spoke of being wrong-footed by his nature. He seemed a simple and straightforward character, and there was no suggestion of the monstrosity of his criminal behaviour, and that made their job even more difficult.
Psychologists were drafted in to examine both men. The doctors, like everyone else, thought Koli the junior partner at worst. Panda was the likely leader.
Panda would have been the main suspect.
He denied any knowledge of what had been going on. Detectives initially didn't believe him, but in trying to find evidence against him, they actually stumbled across evidence that would exonerate him.
There was phone records to show that he wasn't even in the country when some of these killings took place.
It could not have been Panda. Still, the Indian justice system couldn't accept it.
One of the courts hearing the initial evidence was led by a woman judge, and she simply couldn't believe that it wasn't Pandya. But the truth is that the evidence just simply didn't support that argument.
Koli was emerging as solely responsible for one of the worst crimes in Indian history. His boss, Panda, could not have been a killer. Often, he'd been away, in Australia most of the time, on business. It was now, as detectives probed Koli, that forensic pathologists began to notice some evidence which suggested yet another grisly twist to the horror of Nithari village.
The talk was also that Surendra Koli is a cannibal, which was again a very shocking thing for us, a person who's cannibal, a person who's psychopath.
Those living in Nithari, still grieving and reeling from the murder of 19 children, now had another horrific possibility to consider. Just how far had Koli gone in his depravity? Could it be true? Was he a cannibal? The case against Surendra Koli was to take a remarkable turn. The Indian courts allowed him to be given a relaxant when under interrogation by a psychologist. The tactics succeeded. He had said nothing over weeks of interviews. Now he confessed, not just to the murders, but to the way he had disposed of the bodies. His interviewer sat incredulous as Koli revealed what he had done.
I was very appalled to hear about the ghastly way in which the murder was taken place, and then how he behaved with those, and how he hid the bodies, and then how he had tried to cut them also into pieces.
Koli's childhood, spent helping his father, a butcher, cut up the bodies of animals, had provided him with perfect training in the job of dissecting a torso. After killing his victims, that is precisely what he had done.
It was actually a very fine work that he had done with the bodies, the way he would cut them and make it into small pieces which no other person could have been able to do.
The confession evidence alone would still not be enough to convict Koli. Detectives needed more, and they got it.
Then we started searching for other forensic evidence in the house, and we found a lot of blood at the first floor of the house. That was a bathroom being used by Koli.
Now interviewed by police alone, Koli crumbled. He described in minute detail what he'd done, murder by murder. He told the complete story.
He confessed that whenever he killed a person, he took the body up the stairs, kept it there, and when there was nobody in the house, then he used to chop that body in various parts put the various organs in a bag and dispose of in a nala in front of the house in the early morning or the night time. So that was corroborated by the lot of blood stains and at the floor, at the wall, and all those things.
As Koli began to open up, his depravity stunned the nation.
He'd lure the children back to the bungalow with sweets, with toffees, with offers of chocolate, that kind of thing.
He strangled the children with their headscarves, performed sex acts on their bodies, and then cut them to pieces. And during his confession, the revelation nobody wanted to hear, he confirmed it. He had eaten body parts.
In some of the cases, he said that yes, and mostly he said that he basically used to allure the female child, but in 1 or 2 cases, he mistook a boy for a girl, called him, and then he didn't do sex with him, but when he was cutting the body, he ate the raw heart of that particular boy.
After his confession, Koli returned to the behaviour of his younger country days. Quiet, polite, helpful. He even agreed to speak to journalists.
I met him in Dasna prison with his lawyer after a due process which was followed, and he was very much normal. Very soft-spoken person. He hardly said anything. Whatever I asked him, his answer used to be in one-liner or 2 words.
And what was the truth about what India had been hearing, that Koli was a cannibal?
I just asked him, did you try to eat a human part of a child? Then he said yes. I asked him, why did you eat? Then he just answered that I had an urge. That's exactly was surprising for us, that a person who looks normal, who sounded normal, yet he got into such an activity. And he was he had regret in his, there was some amount of remorse in him. And the guilt was there, it was seen on his face for whatever happened. But probably he was in a trance that he was not able to understand why it happened, whatever happened. And now when he's feeling it, that guilt was coming out on his face. And that is what probably made him admit or confess everything before the investigators also.
The recorded confession was released to the world. India could hear the voice of the simple country boy who had turned into the monster of a city.
लड़की सेक्टर 30 की तरफ से 31 निठारी की तरफ आ रही थी, इसका नाम फोटो दिखाने पे और बाद में पता चला पुलिस के जरिए इसका नाम डिम्पा है, तो इसको मैंने काम के लिए बुला लिया अंदर। इसको अंदर लाते ही मैंने इसको बोला कि सामने से मतलब जो है अभी मैडम आ रही, मैं पैसे की बात करवा देता हूँ। और जैसे ये उधर को देख रही थी, मैंने पीछे से इसी के छुरी से इसका गला दबा करके और इसको बेहोश कर दिया। उसके बाद इसके साथ सेक्स करने का कोशिश किया और सेक्स करने का कोशिश किया, थोड़ी देर सेक्स करने की कोशिश करने के बाद उसके बाद जब सेक्स नहीं हो पाया मेरे से, मैंने गला दबा करके इसको मार दिया उसकी छुरी से।
So the confession was not a problem. He was coming with all the stories. Once somebody once he's sure that his crime have been detected, then he will be very cooperative.
बिल्कुल मन में इसी तरह का प्रेशर बना था कि इसको काट के खाऊं करके। अच्छा। तो उसके बाद मैं इसको तुरंत ऊपर बाथरूम में लेके गया। उसी टाइम मेरे को कोई ये नहीं था कि मतलब अभी कोई घर पे आ जाएगा या कोई बात हो जाएगी, कुछ हो जाएगा, मतलब मेरे को इस चीज़ का कोई मतलब वो ही नहीं था, मतलब पता ही नहीं। उसके बाद फिर मैंने उसको ऊपर बाथरूम में लेके चला गया। ऊपर बाथरूम में ले जा करके नीचे आया किचन में, नीचे किचन में से आकर के चाकू लेके गया और इसको मैंने उसी टाइम तुरंत काट करके और इसका मैंने बाजू और ये सीने का एक पीस भी खाया था। अच्छा। हाँ जी, जो मैंने घर में ही मतलब किचन में बनाया था।
It's almost as if he steps out of this person that he's been and begins to see it almost from a third party and explains, well, this is what happened. This little girl that I wanted to have sex with after she was unconscious. I realized that I couldn't, so I thought I'd kill her. Once I did that, I thought I'd take her upstairs and I thought I'd dismember her. And then I thought I'd eat some of her. And he says this in this matter-of-fact way, the way that we would when we were describing something not that we were involved in, but that someone else was involved in.
With such a heinous series of now admitted crimes, the next question for the authorities: Was this man sane enough to be charged, or was he mad?
The psychologist that assessed Koli actually deemed him fit for trial, said that he wasn't unfit, he was able to understand the difference between right and wrong. So this wasn't someone that had lost the ability to engage with his surroundings, the world around him. This was someone that could make decisions. So she was very much saying that this wasn't a psychotic breakdown. This guy was bad, not mad.
At this particular stage, he is more of a psychopath, because here he has committed something and he has no guilt about it. He has killed so many girls, and then he went even to the extent of cooking that flesh and cutting them and serving it to others and having himself. So this is purely a psychopath without guilt that he has done it. So in that respect, definitely he is an abnormal person.
The sexual urge in him probably forced him to get into that kind of activity, and the fear of getting caught later on because of the act that he did on the children, he killed them. And he found that drains are the safest place to dispose of the skulls and the body. So that's how it all happened. This is the version that we gathered and from the people who were close to Surendra Koli.
Surendra Koli confessed to the murder of 19 children and young women. His 2-year reign of serial killing had gone undetected because largely it had gone uninvestigated.
India has found that this case raises some tough questions. Is there one law for the rich, another for the poor? Is the shift from the rural India to the modern India one that could traumatize others, and could other monsters like Koli be created in the process?
Koli was at first sentenced to death. He was placed on remand as appeals about sentence were heard. Certainly this was a case shocking, even by some of the standards of the horrific crimes of recent Indian history. Surendra Koli appalled all who came across him.
Journalists are also human beings, and no matter how much we are involved in reporting facts, but we cannot keep our emotion aside all the time. And this is a case in which small kids were involved, and the place itself was so disturbing for us. Victims crying, mother crying, taking the photograph everywhere, searching for the children. The first day was really very disturbing, to the extent that it was probably for the first time that tears were there in my eyes while reporting. And I could feel the pain of parents who were in search of their child. They didn't know whether the child has been killed or alive. They just wanted to know where the child is.
In 2014, a series of court hearings considered commuting Koli's sentence to life. At one stage, it seemed he would be hanged. The Indian president refused a petition for mercy. But in January of 2015, the sentence was commuted. The judge felt that Koli had been waiting too long to discover his fate. He would be kept behind bars, but his life would be spared.
He will never be released. Life means life.
Surendra Koli really is as bad as it gets, but what purpose would be served by another death?
The Lal family is still laundering the linen of rich people who live and work in the same neighbourhood, but who represent an India that the Dalit or untouchables are not part of. The 2015 confirmation of Surendra Koli's sentence may bring to an end the case of a cannibal who preyed on those who lived in the slums, but it will not bring to an end the enormous disparity in wealth, culture, and moral values which exist in the world's second largest country.
We always want to try and find that one thing, what caused it, what happened in his biochemistry, in his childhood, in his surroundings. I think in this case it was a perfect storm. This man must have been born with a predilection to enjoying pain, to enjoying inflicting pain. He must have been able to develop a sense of entitlement over how he treated human beings, a certain contempt for human beings, probably nurtured by the way that he saw, his boss, which he idolized, working on them, and then also the right social surroundings. He was able to go away and be quiet in this small village. So all of these things work together. So we don't have one reason why this happened, but a lot of very small things that led to a very, very terrible series of events.